Insiders, Antoine Seawright, our Democratic strategist, Dave Wilson, our Republican strategist. Let's get caught up on what's happening at the State House now. I know insurance reform, the liquor liability bill, a lot of discussion in the Senate this week.
The Senate had a couple of very heated committee meetings on that. For you at home, this is where the bars and restaurants that you see closing around town, a lot of them are having to deal with that because their insurance rates skyrocketed because of major changes that had to do with their insurance. You had restaurants who had bills that were like $5,000 a year for liability that jumped to $50,000. And that right there is a place where the question is, when are the insurance companies going to come to the table and say, we're going to have rates that are actually reasonable for South Carolina businesses?
You know, this is where Republicans who are in charge of both the House and Senate and the governor's mansion are going to decide whose side are they going to be on. Are they going to be on the side of the people and small business, or are they going to be on the side of big insurance companies? Because at the end of the day, that's the battle. It's not a right versus left, Democrat versus Republican. It's, do you support small business? Do you support the will of the people? Or do you support big business? I hope in South Carolina we err on the side of supporting small business, because that is the fertilizer that keeps the soil of this state keep going and flowing.
And it is the place where you have the majority of people who are employed. They're employed in small businesses. And so when you look at this, and this is it's a deep, thick bill, and some portions have to do with liquor liability, but there are a lot of other things that are in there that can give insurance companies a leg up against small business and the individual.
And keep in mind, we're a hospitality state. We're a tourism state. So if you go up and down the coast, the middle of the state, upper part of the state, you see a lot of small mom and pop restaurants, bars, etc. We call it Southern hospitality. That's why people come to South Carolina. So to do something to put a hindrance on that, or to shut the doors of that, would be everything against what the Republicans say they were fighting for during the course of the pandemic, when we were essentially forced to shut down businesses and so forth because of a once-in-a-century global pandemic.
There's also talk at the State House of creating some sort of DOGE-like team to look at government waste spending in South Carolina. What are you guys hearing about that?
Well, I think that's funny, because Republicans have been in charge of state government for over 2 decades. So if there's any waste, fraud, and abuse in the system, then that means it lays at their feet. But look, I don't think it's a bad thing to evaluate the system and to figure out how to get out waste, fraud, and abuse. Here's where I have a problem. If you look at what DOGE is doing at the federal level, laying off FAA workers, laying off USDA workers, tax season IRS workers, etc., they're not dealing with waste, fraud, and abuse. They're cutting into the bone of government, and America will experience bleeding because of that. So if Republicans want to look at their own misgivings and their own waste, fraud, and abuse, we have no problem with that. Just don't come messing with services that impact places like I grew up and places all across this state that need government services.
This is one place where Antoine and I are not going to get too head-to-head on this. The reality is there are already committees that exist for oversight of what's going on. There's a budgeting process. There maybe needs to be changes in the way that we do budgeting in South Carolina, go back to zero-based budgeting, so we stop spending money just because we have extra left over at the end of the year. That's something that we really need to be looking at. Is this a method to do that? We're putting another layer on top of a layer, but there does need to be somebody who's going to start digging into the books a little bit more.
We don't need an unelected billionaire like a co-governor, like Elon Musk is co-president, coming to South Carolina, examining government and saying we're going to cut this, that, and the third, because we're a government state. We depend on the federal government. We depend on the state government, regardless of how you voted in the election. These cuts that are happening at the federal level are going to have impact on South Carolina. If we play that game in this state, lives will be lost.
Well, I think the other part about it, though, Antoine, is the fact that right now it's only legislators who are doing this level of oversight.
So
there's nobody.
You want a co-governor?
No, what I want to be able to see
Musk.
is people be able, for business folks, for individuals in the community, to actually be involved in looking at what's going on. There's a lot of expertise out there in your community, in my community, in every community across this state that allow them to take their business experience and say, let's look at the books.
Except the people of South Carolina elected their elected officials to do that. They didn't ask Republican-dominated state to go pick one of their buddies to look at government to do what Elon Musk is doing, because that's dangerous, and I think it's everything against who we are as South Carolinians.
We got about 90 seconds left. I want to touch on that $1.8 billion account that was talked about so much last year. In the last couple of months, the governor said there was never any missing money, and then the treasurer's office chimed in. There's an accounting error. But there's still discussion at the State House about this. What's going on?
There are long discussions in the Senate Finance Committee on this. They are digging deep. Some people call it a witch hunt. The state treasurer has called it a witch hunt because he says that he's got senators that are coming after him. The reality is somebody said there was $1.8 billion in a fund, but there was no money in the bank. And we were then told by the state treasurer under oath that we were making interest off this $1.8 billion, almost $200 million in interest.
So is there an effort to do something with the treasurer's office?
There will probably be efforts, especially on the Senate side, to start asking the question whether or not the treasurer needs to be an appointed or an elected position.
Well, a treasurer lying under oath is against the law, last time I checked. So let's start there. But this Republican problem, this $1.8 billion invisible money, monopoly money, is something the public should be concerned about. That's why when people run for these offices, they need a certain expertise. The fact is the treasurer's not running again, so we will have an election to decide that. But here is a Republican problem that the people of South Carolina have to make an evaluation of what they decide.
So wait, you want people with expertise to start looking at things that are going on with state government?
I don't want people
but we have a problem with that on the Doge front?
No, you are misrepresenting the facts. What I'm saying is we should have expertise of people running for office. Last time I checked, he was an exterminator or something, going to be the treasurer of the state. I think that's like oil and water, vodka and crown. Two different things.
Two different things on that one.
Antoine, Dave, as always, guys, thank you so
Thanks,
very
sir.
much. We're going to take a quick break. We're back with more in just a moment.